say about Job? Job is one of these stories that everybody thinks they know. Everybody talks about the patience of Job. Now, we just got 11 verses from the book of Job, and we find him sitting there in the ashes, scraping his skin with a broken piece of pottery, cutting off the sores that are tormenting him. We find his wife watching his suffering and saying, dude. That's what the actual Hebrews say. Saying, dude, just let go. You don't have to fight this anymore. Go ahead and curse God and die. We find Job calling her a foolish woman. What can you say about it? We have this text that reflects a worldview that is long before the one that we share. In fact, we find a text that comes from long before the Jews started writing down their scriptures. In fact, and this is something that you can use to amaze your friends, archaeologists have found not exact copies of the book of Job, but the outline of the book of Job, written in Babylonian. And in this book that predates Job by about 1,000 years, that they call the Mesopotamian Theodicy, say that 5 times real fast, they find this guy, Sagil Kinam Ubib. And yes, there's a quiz later, so remember that one. But Sagil Kinam Ubib goes through these exact same things that Job goes through. Except, it's not God and Satan who come together to have a conversation, but it's the Mesopotamian gods, because it was a polytheistic worldview. And they come together and they're chatting about, this guy Sagil Kinam Ubib. And they keep saying this so that you remember his name. This guy Sagil Kinam Ubib, he sure likes you, Marduk. But I bet if you didn't bless him so much, I bet if things went badly for him, he wouldn't follow you so closely. And almost point for point, the story goes along exactly the same as the book of Job does. Sagil Kinam Ubib's friends come and they sit with him and they try and explain to him why all these things are going wrong for him. And finally, Marduk, the great god of the Babylonians, has his moment of saying to Sagil Kinam Ubib, what was his name again? Not Job. Yeah, there's probably a reason that the Hebrew people shortened it, isn't there? But almost point for point, it's the same story. And I know that for some people that's a challenge. Finding a story that's in our Bible that we got from the Hebrews, that the Hebrews got from the Babylonians, that the Babylonians, they might have gotten it from somewhere else too. We don't know. But what I can tell you is that while in exile in Babylon, the Jewish people heard this story of the Babylonian gods. And it touched them in a special way. It went right to their hearts. They said, the world's not fair. Bad things happen to good people, and we don't understand why. It makes us crazy to see suffering and not be able to explain what's going on or what the mechanism is or even be able to change it. It drives us nuts. When our friends come to us in our suffering and say, well, if only you'd done something differently, then it might... You ever have friends who do that? Yeah. That's another sermon for another day. But we find this story of the theodicy. Theodicy, by the way, is the fancy theological word for trying to explain away the problem of evil. Yeah. In my experience, you can't quite do it. People try. We try awfully hard. But the book of Job, it's one that we turn to again and again, mostly by talking about it rather than reading it. In my work as a hospital chaplain, I find people in their suffering. And they talk about Job's patience, which I guess would mean that Job was a doctor and he had a lot of patience, but that's perhaps Thank you. I appreciate it when people laugh at my really lame jokes. But people talk about the patience of Job. And when they do, it to me is always a sign that they haven't read the book of Job. Because Job, as he sits in his suffering, as he watches his crops fail, as he watches his livestock die, as his body is covered with sores, and he scrapes off with a potsherd, ouch, as he sees his children slaughtered, as he sees his servants killed. Job is anything but patient. He shakes his fist at God and he rails against the injustice of things. God, don't you know that I have always been faithful? Why is this happening to me? I've shaken my fist at God too. I hope you have. When things have gone sour for you, when all of your plans have gone right down the toilet, I hope you've shaken your fist at God. When you've seen injustice in the world and haven't been able to do a darn thing to change it, I hope you've shaken your fist at God. Because to sit there and go, oh well, no biggie, it's a sign that you don't care. It's a sign that you're not invested in what's going on. It's a sign that perhaps you need to buckle down. So I'm sure that every one of you sitting here today has had a moment of shaking your fist at God. Why? And that's okay. It's better than okay. Because when we shake our fist, when we cry out in agony, when we pour out our despair, we find that things may not change, but we change. We find that as we sit there in the ashes and we scrape off those sores, as we're persistent in our faithfulness, that something is different. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have readings from the book of Job. Ultimately, though, I'm going to give away the ending here, just in case you too haven't read it. But ultimately, God appears before Job and gives an answer. And if you're like me, it's an answer that makes you want to shake your fist again. When God says, where were you when the world was formed? Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? Do you know where the sun sleeps? If not, stop asking questions. Yeah. What are you thinking? But you know, the book of Job is challenging. Of course it's challenging, because it connects us with the deepest suffering of humanity. It connects us with the realization that we're not going to find the answers. It connects us with the pain of our neighbors and our own pain as well. It raises questions, but it also reflects a worldview that's at least 3,000 years old. That worldview in which the Babylonian gods get together and have a little game of one-upsmanship. Or the circumcised version of that, where God and Satan have a little side bet. Satan, by the way, this is another thing you can use to amaze your friends, isn't the same character throughout the Bible. Yeah. This earliest appearance of Satan, Ha-Satan, is Satan not as the devil, not as the fallen angel, but as the accuser, as the one who would be a prosecuting attorney in a courtroom. Part of that divine counsel, not an outsider. That change in the storyline only comes a little bit later in the writing of scriptures. But even so, we think to ourselves, is that what we know of God? Is God the kind of God who would make a side bet with Satan or with anybody else? Saying, yeah, go ahead, do your worst, my friend here. I don't think so. I really don't. The God that I know, who I expect is the same God that you know, is the God who, when all of these bad things happen to us, is right there at our side, holding our hand, weeping with us, helping us through. Rabbi Harold Kushner, a good many years ago now, wrote a book that most people get the title wrong. The title, yeah. There's grammar in that sentence, just trust me on that. But most people get his book's title wrong. They want to make it, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. But that's not the title. It's when. When bad things happen to good people. Because they will. And the question is always, what next? Where is God in this? How does God help us through? So today we take our first look at Job, a book that challenges our worldview, a book that, if we read it at its face value, makes us want to shake our fist at God perhaps a little more. But a book that also helps us see that the questions that we ask are the same questions that people have been asking for millennia. As people of faith, we struggle, we wrestle, we look for an answer. And usually we find ourselves thwarted. Now, in some churches, I guarantee you that would be seen as bad news. That somehow we would have to wrap everything up and put a bow on it and say, but Jesus fixed it. But we're not that kind of church. We're the kind of church that says, yeah, that's rough. That's real. That's our lived experience. And then we find God among it. We find a holy presence that helps us keep moving. That helps us as we take those potsherds and scrape. Presence that is with us, even in the pain. My prayer for you, my prayer for all of us, is that in our pain, we would find God's holy presence, sustaining us, transforming us, and helping us through. May it be so. Amen.